Adriana's Act 2 Rondo from L'Arbore di Diana by Vicente Martín y Soler, the role in which the Italian soprano Adriana Ferrarese del Bene appeared before the Viennese public for the first time in 1788. The singer there was the soprano Adriana González. I'm James Jolly and welcome to this Gramophone podcast. Adriana González's new Audax album, Rondos for Adriana, explores the roles and repertoire that her namesake would have sung and which secured her reputation as one of the great divas of her day. On her new album, Adriana González is partnered by Ensemble Diderot, led by Johannes Pramsohler, who also plays a couple of rondos for violin and orchestra, and conducted by Iñaki Encina Oyon. I caught up with Adriana González in Vienna during rehearsals for Mozart's Le Nozze di Figaro, in which she was singing the Countess.
So here we are in the Staatsoper in Vienna, and this is one of those very rare occasions where the venue is absolutely perfect for what we're going to talk about, because we're going to talk about your new album, which focuses really on the voice of the singer Adriana Ferrarese del Bene, who was the first Fiordiligi in Così, tutte, and she was the first Susanna in the revival of Figaro here in Vienna. And this is a wonderful collection of arias, some familiar, quite a lot very unfamiliar, some by composers that one's never even heard of.
Indeed.
So in a way, it's like somebody's given you a dress that Adriana wore and said, how does it feel? What can you sort of tell me about her voice from the music she sang?
I mean, it's quite an overwhelming feeling of recognizing how singers were free back then musically and what dominance they had of a score. And first of all, that a composer would write something specifically for your voice, what you could do wonderfully, and that actually showcased all of your talent is a huge, huge privilege. Her vocality of Adriana Ferrarese, also in historical texts, like critics of the time, they wrote that she had a really amazing chest voice. So you will find in most of the arias, there's very low tessitura, where she sings a low A, a low B, a low C, low D, which for a soprano is not really a tessitura where most people are comfortable. And not only was the lower register very developed in Adriana Ferrarese, but she also used that to anchor amazing jumps of an octave and a half. So you will have a low A and then she will sing a high A, like a 2 octaves higher. So this was very characteristic of her expressivity. Also, her vocal talent was not only being able to do these jumps, but also using them expressively to portray the characters. And she also was, of course, very virtuous in the cadenzas that were written by her and for her. For example, we would think modernly that a cadenza in a Mozart aria is something a bit out of style that we don't really do nowadays. But actually, Mozart did write for her specifically a cadenza at the end of the first section of Al desio di chi t'adora, where you would think this is a cadenza that Bellini or Donizetti would do, but of course they also came from somewhere and they probably heard all these cadenzas from someplace. And actually Mozart wrote like a 4 or 5 bar cadenza for Ferrarese in this aria. So you really take into consideration that they were very virtuous musicians, the singers of this time, and that they had also not only the knowledge, but the freedom to change and do variations and play with the instrumental part of the opera and not just do, a very simple melody, but they would adorn things very much. And she would do a lot of trills, for example, a lot of scales, some triplets. There's many, many technical difficulties in singing Adriana Ferrarese's repertoire. And especially the rondeau form is very long, because it's the precedent of what we then learn in bel canto, of the largo and the cavalletta at the end. Well, the rondeau is the same form. It starts with a slow part and then you have the virtuosic fast part, sort of to say. So I can also say that she had quite a stamina for these arias that are not easy at all. They're very long, very, very long.
Because listening to the Countess's aria, when it comes round the second time, and all this fabulous ornamentation, was that something you did, or did you do it in collaboration with your...
No, we did that in collaboration with Iñaki Encina, who's our conductor for the project and also a very good friend. He's actually at the origin of choosing this repertoire for me because he knows my voice so well. He's basically one of the first persons that heard me in Europe and that sort of launched my career in a way. He was very supportive at the beginning, organizing singing lessons, giving me coachings himself, even organizing auditions. So he's been there from the very, very beginning, which then was very helpful to know what repertoire do we choose for this album. And he said, well, in a way, Dove Sono is Contessa from Nozze is the role of the whole album that Ferrarese did not sing. She sung Susanna, which was the prima donna role at the time. And Contessa was the secondary soprano.
It's kind of hard to get your head around that nowadays, isn't it?
Indeed. Well, in a way, if you would have heard Al desio di chi t'adora at the end of the opera, then you really see how different Susanna is in that vocality, because it's a very virtuosic aria at the end of the opera after already singing a very long role. So I think Ferrarese really wanted to show this. But a curious thing about Dove Sono is that in the manuscript of Mozart, you can see at the beginning it's written aria, but there's a little scratched out word, and it's actually rondo. So the Dove Sono has also this form of rondo, but because they didn't want this concurrence between the Susanna and the Contessa, he said, don't worry, I won't let the other one have a rondo. The rondo is only for the prima donna. So he just scratched out the word the rondo and wrote in aria. So in a way, both would have been the prima donnas of the opera. But going back to the variations, we thought, since this album is an homage to Adriana Ferrarese's vocality, we should interpret it as she would have approached it, which then meant adding variations, adding some cadenzas, some very dramatic jumps with a nice high C there in the middle. But we wanted to approach this not only as Adriana González, how I would have sung it, but how Ferrarese would have interpreted it. And that's why Iñaki wrote these variations for Dove Sono, inspired on the other variations that we already had of the other rondos.
Because they're really wonderful, because you can obviously you can still hear the line, but it's like some gorgeous kind of plant that's sort of grown around it, and it just looks gorgeous. But the arias, the melody line is, obviously you can still hear it. No, the first time I heard it, I thought, oh gosh, that's amazing.
Thank you so
much. I'm sure if you did it here, they'd have heart failure.
Well, I don't know. Of course, obviously, Vienna is a house of a lot of tradition, and the tradition that they've known also, like, since the Karajan times and the Wiener Philharmonica. So I don't want to try maybe something so experimental with them the first time I'm presenting myself in Vienna. But it's definitely an informed historical performance that we did for this album. So, it depends also on the project, but it's definitely interesting to know how free the musical part of a singer was back then.
I have to say, when I first listened to it, and I was listening with a friend who's quite a distinguished record producer, and he said, gosh, she has such an amazing mezzo-ish colour to this voice. Is she really a soprano? And I said, no, she's really a soprano. And that's why this Adriana, the two Adrianas, fit together so well, because, you've got a very powerful lower voice, but you can, shoot up to the top, with remarkable ease.
It's there. It's definitely a technical ability to be able to do that, because you have to keep the homogeneous tone, the color of the voice, not to feel a big break in between registers. But yeah, I mean, with age, I've also noticed that the voice is changing and it's opening more. It's maturing with age, as we all do. But I really love to keep this youth and this flexibility that the repertoire brought to me, because you have to be able to approach this type of writing, you need to sing also with your full instrument. Otherwise, the low part of the voice is completely lost, which is not doing justice to what actually Ferrarese was probably doing at the time, which was a probably very raw chest voice, to be so expressive, because that's also what she's known for being very expressive with her voice. So it's definitely something that the color doesn't necessarily mean that it's more dramatic. It just means that it's a full instrument. So it's greatly appreciated that people, consider this, but now
also we live in a time when people like to pigeonhole. She's a soprano, she's a mezzo, but actually there are a lot of operatic roles that can be comfortably taken by a soprano or mezzo. They weren't that fussed about what you were categorized as, rather than what you could do.
Exactly. And even if you look at Dorabella, for example, it's maybe not as low as Fiordiligi at some moments. So I think as long as you are healthy and you respect your instrument, I don't see why you can't, try repertoire and see where your own limits lie. That said, you should always, be careful and try to not go to the extreme excess of what your voice can do, because there is definitely, I want to say a place, but a certain type of music, tessitura, notes, like how high your voice can stay there for a long time. And if you get very tired staying in the higher register or in the lower register, well, those are things to always pay attention to. But in a way, you should be able to develop your instrument to the full capacity, both in your chest voice, your head voice, and your whistle register. Then what you do with it is very interesting.
And do you find it more comfortable singing with period instruments, so you're at a slightly different pitch? And of course, here in Vienna, they have a different tuning altogether, don't they?
It's very high. I think it's 444 sometimes. I'm not very informed of that. I've only, all the gossip of that between singers happens, and they're like, it's very high in Vienna, and actually it's, a bit uncomfortable. And sometimes you sing with period instruments and you think, well, this is very low. It's also very uncomfortable. But I think for the repertoire that we do in opera in general, like the standard repertoire, it would be very interesting to approach it with period instruments, because it was composed for that type of instrument. Nowadays, obviously, with the Industrial Revolution, then the metal strings came to take the protagonism in the orchestra, which is a beautiful, brilliant sound, but it's not the most organic sound. At least for singers, I could say we are the last organic pillar of opera singing as it was, because we're the only flesh and bone left, sort of to say. The rest is metal in a way, like the brass has changed.
You are original instruments.
We are original instruments, exactly. So it's definitely very comforting when you get to perform with period instruments, because the pitch is not that high. And so it's more organic to the voice, to where the passaggio, where the larynx tilts, how you breathe, how low you can breathe, and also how low you can breathe for the lower notes, because then it's, an A is lower, then it has to have this depth of body, of color, of voice. So your body functions in a very different way, but curiously more organic. So I don't know. I would love that we would do more things with period instruments, even if it's more delicate, but also for the balance of the voices nowadays in live performance. You see a big difference, that there's a lot of balance problems because orchestras are very loud, but that's also normal when you have metal strings, because the instrument is stronger. But we're still a flesh and bone, so it's something to keep into consideration when one works on the balance in a live performance.
I mean, listening to the album, I was kind of a reminded, I guess, because I must have noticed it before, but the range of Fiordiligi.
Yeah.
Because you always think, it's a lyric soprano voice, it's high, Dorabella does the middle stuff, and actually you listen to the aria and you just think, gosh, the range is colossal.
Yeah, she goes from a low A, which in the album we went even further. Iñaki wrote a variation with a low F. And I think it's F sharp, by the way, not F. And then she goes up to a high C. So it's quite a feat to sing Fiordiligi. It's not an easy role, especially because the arias have this characteristic of the lower register, but the rest of the role is quite high. Because it's the first voice in the ensembles that carries the drama and these high notes that are very effective. So you have to know how to manage this stamina of, okay, I'm singing in the higher register of my voice, but then I still need to have the ease and the relaxation of my larynx to be able to reach the lower register. So it is a very difficult role to sing.
I mean, is it Così an opera you like, or more specifically, is Fiordiligi a role you like?
Love it. I love it. Così fan tutte is one of the actually first Mozart operas that I heard. And I performed it quite a lot in the opera studio in Paris, but as Despina. And we did maybe a full year of Così fan tutte, ensembles, preparation. We did the opera like in a little tournée in 3 different theaters. So I know Così like the back of my hand. Then when I approached Fiordiligi, I was 21 when I sung Despina. And now when I approach Fiordiligi, I thought, okay, now is a good time to approach it, because it is a very demanding role when it comes to stamina. It's very long, it's very demanding, but the music is gorgeous. The duets with Dorabella, the duet with Ferrando, but my favorite part are the ensembles, the sextetto and the finale. This is just brilliance of musical dramaturgy, where you know exactly what's happening just by the sound of it. So this is obviously it's a very visceral excitement to listen to Così fan tutte.
What I loved about this record is, reading about some of the arias and the way that, Ferrarese would turn up to do a show and then she'd bring an aria saying, I'd like you to pop this one in. Can you imagine that nowadays? It's just so extraordinary if you came and said, actually, I've been singing such and such, could we put that in, somewhere in Act 1?
They would be like, wait, why do you want to sing Fiordiligi instead of Donna Elvira, which Ferrarese also sung, by the way? Yeah, we've changed a lot in I think the respect and idealization of opera interpretation. Also because the repertoire, there were so many operas composed back then, and nowadays it's much less than the production that you had 200 years ago. So we tend to keep it very respectful and to, it's a sacred thing to have this heritage. But in that time, they composed operas left and right, and then you also decided as a singer, no, I want to present myself in the best possible light. And I know that the tenor aria, I could sing it just as well. It's very effective. Like Ferrarese did this once. She chose one of the tenor arias in one of the operas she sung. And she said, I want to sing this aria the next time I do this opera. So she took the tenor aria, changed the text, and basically sung it herself in the next performance. So you really consider also the flexibility that we had, not only the singers, but also the orchestra, to be able to sight read this and to be like, oh, well, okay, we're doing this and in this key, which sometimes the keys don't fit together, because then you're suddenly in D major, and instead of going to to a G major, you would go to a E flat, and you think, oh, this is a bit of a weird transition.
Although I guess if the diva had said, we're going to do this now, it was for her fans, who presumably will be, clapping and cheering and screaming. So actually, if there's a sudden shift of key, people will have probably forgotten what the original key was. So it doesn't really matter when you go on with the show.
Very, very probably. I mean, the public has also definitely changed. The size of the houses. We were a couple of days ago at the Burgtheater here with my husband, and we saw the Schachnovelle, which was fantastic. And I thought, wait, Burgtheater. Nozze di Figaro was premiered in Burgtheater, and Così tutte with Ferrarese was debuted at the Burgtheater. But it wasn't this Burgtheater modernly, but the old Burgtheater that was at Michaelerplatz. And when I even see the Burgtheater now, it wasn't that big. When you compare it now to the Vienna State Opera, which is a very big hall, and to other opera houses, the amount of people that went to the opera was also the size of the cities, the population in the world was very different. So there's definitely many things that have changed, but the music sort of tries to stay the same.
After your contessa here in Vienna, what's your sort of schedule look like for the coming months?
Very exciting. Mozart and Verdi, which I think go by the hand a bit, because now I have Fiordiligi in concert version in Monaco at the beginning of February with Cecilia Bartoli as Despina. I'm so much looking forward to this because I love her so much. She was a huge inspiration for me to do classical singing, because my first singing teacher gave me some scores and was like, you should study aria antiche if you want to study, just vocal technique, because classical vocal technique is very complete and blah, blah, blah. Okay, and she gave me a CD of arias, aria antiche, sung by Bartoli. And I fell in love in these vocal inflections and the expressivity that was so particular, It's something else, classical singing. And now to be able to sing with her is like a dream come true of a small child, you're very excited. It's like going to Disneyland. So after Vienna, I go to Monaco for Così, and immediately after that, I go to Opernhaus Zürich to do a staged ballet version of Verdi Requiem, which looks beautiful, really. I know that Krasimira Stoyanova did the premiere of it, and also to step in her shoes to take over this production is very beautiful.
Where do they put you in the production? Are you up on stage with the dancers?
Yes.
Or?
Yes, we're in the middle of the whole dance choreography. The dancers interact with us while we are singing Verdi's Requiem. So it's very exciting. It's like when Pina Bausch staged Orfeo and the singers were accompanied by the ballet dancers. So it's a very similar proposal, which I find is very beautiful also. After I go to Toulouse for Desdemona in Otello, which is going to be my second Desdemona this season. And I love it. It's my first actual proper Verdi role that I'm approaching. And I find it's just perfectly written. So it's going to be also very exciting. And it's the first time I'm in Toulouse. So that's also
Lovely
very
city.
exciting. Yes, and the orchestra, they're amazing. They sound really so just glorious. And I finished my season with Nozze di Figaro in Barcelona, which is also a beautiful city where I've already sung several times. And that's going to be the rest of my season. It's quite enough. It's already ending at the end of June. So it's quite a charge.
Do you have a sort of, do you have in your head a kind of, well, at some stage, I want to do this and I'd like to do that. And maybe if the voice allows me, I'd like to do that.
Indeed. I mean, I try to not take more than 2 or 3 role debuts per season because I don't have the time to prepare more than that. I don't think it's also physically possible to go under so much stress and keep your level that high. Like, for example, next season I'll be debuting Nedda, which is a beautiful piece also but that's the only role debut that I will have next season.
And it's a shorter piece as well, so
It is.
It's intense, but it's not drawn out.
Indeed. Like this season, my big debut was Desdemona. And that's already a very intense piece, and I like to take the time to prepare things with a year or two in anticipation and not rush technically into something that is very new, that will definitely bring your voice into another step further, you know, into the opening of the instrument and maturing your instrument. So I want to take that very slowly. I have a list of roles, of course. You always have a list because people ask you all the time, which roles would you like to sing? And of course, in that moment, you have a complete mental blank.
Yes, exactly.
And so I've just learned, have a list of things and mark it, the role, and in how many years you want to sing it. Or if it's already, you know, past the time to sing it, which can also happen as you mature in your career.
Do you venture out of the sort of Italian? Because most of the roles you've talked about, well, I think everything you've talked about, apart from perhaps the Verdi Requiem, is just in Latin, but you sing Micaela?
Yes, that's my battle horse.
Yes, so
she's
you do
opened
French.
The doors a lot. Yeah, and I'm actually French also now by...
Oh, right.
I
So are
became
you
a French
based
citizen.
in France?
Yes, Paris is my base.
Very sensible.
Quite well connected and, you know, could be worse. Yes, I sing a lot in French. I have already... The first album that we got out with Audax was all French melody, which I found is a great way to go by presenting the voice with melody, which is a very intimate setting, but it was all in French. I like singing in French. Things like Marguerite in Faust, for example, is a role that I have aimed at very much to try to do in the upcoming years. Other things like Guillaume Tell from Rossini, which is also in French, would be a wonderful thing to debut. But then, I don't know, something like German, now that my German's getting better and better, I would like to slowly approach some Strauss, maybe some Wagner, but not the heavy things, you know. There's so much repertoire, and there's so much time that you can only have to debut certain things. So I take my time to mature really into the role and to stand above it and not have the role crash me down. So I think things like, for example, Elisabeth in Tannhäuser would be something glorious to sing, but of course not now, not even in the 5 next years that would come, but long term. So you have to try to, at least personally, I try to aim and see, okay, how's the voice doing from here in 5 years? I should be able to still sing Liu, for example, in Turandot, which is a role that I also love and I sing quite a lot. Then Micaela, okay, I will maybe sing it for a couple of years more, and then I'll probably retire it, because then the voice will open more towards other repertoire, for example, some more serious Verdis like Don Carlo. So I have to also manage my voice, that I'm not fighting against the natural openness of the instrument, which is maturing with the years, and trying to keep it, you know, as light as I can to sing a very innocent Micaela, which for the last 10 years has been a wonderful role for me. It has helped me mature and keep the instrument healthy, but there's also a moment where it's time to retire a role, which I think it will come soon. But yeah, I have also a good team. My agent and my singing teacher and my coaches, they help me always analyze the roles and see if it's a good option for me to present myself, because you don't, as a singer, I respect the music very much, and if I cannot uphold to what is written in the score, I'd rather not do it, because then I suffer in my own incompetence not being able to do it. The music suffers because it's not presented correctly, and the public suffers because you're suffering. So, you know, it's a complete loss to approach a project like that. So it's really good to look at a role and be like, oh, yes, I can defend this music, because that's all that this is about, you know, like doing music wonderfully. It's very exhilarating.
The singer was our guest this week, the soprano Adriana González, and her album Rondos for Adriana, on which she's partnered by Ensemble Diderot and Iñaki Encina Oyon, is just out from Audax. Gramophone podcasts are free, so if you enjoy them, then a really great way to support our work is to take out a subscription to Gramophone magazine. Over 13 issues a year, we bring you hundreds of reviews by our expert critics, as well as in-depth articles about the latest classical music releases and the most exciting musicians of the day. And if you head over to gramophone.co.uk/subscribe and enter the code podcast20 in the checkout, you can even get a 20% discount off any subscription package. We really value your support. And consider leaving a review or rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. And do look out for another Gramophone podcast very soon.